Now, I'm sick to my back teeth of hearing how slow we were in the UK to respond to the refugee crisis in Ukraine and how people are being racist, and if the people had been black or darker skinned, the response wouldn't have been as great. Comparing this war to others and how the British public don't respond in the same way to channel migrants, and how the language is all wrong, that we're calling these people from Ukraine refugees, and why not migrants, which in their eyes is a stigma. Comparisons of our so-called racism to Brexit, which is odd, really, because as far as I can see, most people in Europe are white. So how does that fit in with the narrative that we are more welcoming because the people of Ukraine are also white? The media doing their whole doing down Britain thing and telling us how much better other European countries are because they didn't ask for visas. Well, I can tell you now, as a woman of colour and in my experience, some of those countries in Europe are the most racist I've ever visited. Look, I'm fed up of everything always ending up with the British public being called racists. You know what? Until parts of the mainstream media started shoving it down my throat, I hadn't even noticed that those fleeing the massacre in Ukraine were different in any way. All I saw was people being killed in the most abhorrent and senseless manner, and for no real reason. Hardly the same as people, mainly men, fleeing the relative safety of France, having paid thousands to get on a dinghy to evade the law. How can you even compare the two? If we must be forced to look at this through the lens of colour, why have people barely noticed that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, isn't white? And she's hardly going to make it impossible for others like her to get here, is she? She's inherited a system that needs major tweaking, and she's working on it. And given the constraints that she's under, I think she's doing a pretty good job. Boris Johnson's government, by the way, has the most diverse cabinet in history, something that still evades every other political party in this country, even now. And whilst we're at it, if those pumping out this nonsense are that bothered, how come they stayed silent when reports of racism at the borders was reported? Apparently people of colour weren't initially being allowed to leave Ukraine. They should have been shouting about this from the hilltops, but you didn't really hear much about it. Yes, we do all agree the forms are way too complicated. Asking for things like bank and mortgage statements from people fleeing a war zone, absolutely ridiculous. But to be honest, we in this country are renowned for our overcomplication of things. I mean, you only need to look at the civil service and the NHS. We do it to ourselves. So we're hardly going to change a habit of a lifetime for other people. Remember COVID and the rules? Too complicated by half. Even the Prime Minister couldn't fathom them. The 5 levels, the 3 tiers, we were all in tears by the end of that one. And we're currently awaiting the results of the Partygate questionnaire. I dread to think how complicated they made that. I sincerely hope by now that people have sensibly kicked that nonsense to the curb and we can focus on this incomprehensible humanitarian crisis. I imagine those creating the forms for the potential Ukrainian refugees have never entered a war zone before, and from their houses, which a lot of these civil servants are still working from, haven't a clue about war. And thankfully, most of us living now haven't either. Look, over 150,000 people have opened their homes to the Ukrainian scheme to house a refugee. We are giving those who take on an individual or family £350 a month, and we were the first to step in to provide weapons for the Ukraine. Hardly the behaviour of racist people. I'm proud to be British, and I refuse to allow anyone to tell me otherwise.